Savannah Rayne had always been a girl with stars in her eyes and chains around her ankles, a dreamer trapped in a world that never dreamed back. She spent her nights serving coffee and burnt pies at Molly's diner, watching travelers chase futures she could barely afford to imagine. Life had always been unkind, but it turned cruel when her younger brother, Tyler, was wrongly accused of theft and jailed without warning, leaving her clinging to the bitter edge of despair. With no family support and no lawyer willing to fight without a price, she was running out of time and hope. The bail was set at an impossible sum, and desperation clung to her like second skin. That's when fate, always theatrical and never kind, took her to the Wexley Gala, a glittering event. She crashed in a borrowed dress and frayed heels, pretending to be someone else for just one night. Under the golden chandeliers and billion-dollar smiles, Savannah didn't belong, but she held her head high until her trembling hand knocked over a tray of champagne, drenching the black tailored suit of none other than Jaxon Wilder, Silicon Valley's golden boy and a man whispered about in headlines like mythology. He turned, expecting entitlement, maybe flirtation, but what he found instead were hazel eyes filled with guilt, grace, and a glimmer of defiance. She expected him to explode debut. He only smiled, as if her clumsiness was a breath of real air in a room full of rehearsed perfection. That moment sparked something neither of them saw coming. They slipped away from the crowd, into quieter corners where truth dared to breathe. He told her about his broken engagement, the emptiness of success, and the nights where money couldn't mute the silence. She listened with the stillness of someone who knew pain intimately. She told him about Tyler, her brother with a heart too big and luck too small, and the injustice that suffocated their lives. He didn't pity her, he respected her. And in between that truth and the orchestra's distant hum, he made her a proposal. Pretend to be his date for the remainder of the evening, shield him from vultures disguised as investors, and in return, he'd write her a check big enough to change everything. She should have walked away, but her brother's name echoed in her chest like a scream, and her dignity had already been bruised far too many times. So, she agreed. Arm in arm, they dazzled the crowd with a chemistry that wasn't faked. He whispered jokes in her ear that made her laugh for real, and she pulled him back into the world like an anchor disguised as art. After midnight, the gala faded. The air grew colder, and the silence between them thickened. Outside the Grand Marquette, he didn't ask her up. He only handed her a hotel key, eyes asking what his lips couldn't, and she scared, but burning took it. That night, under soft linen sheets and city lights bleeding through the curtains, Savannah gave him her virginity, not as a transaction, but as surrender. It wasn't lust. It wasn't just need. It was a quiet collision of two people so bruised by life, they didn't know whether they were touching or breaking. He kissed her like a man searching for home. She held him like a woman who knew he didn't have one. No promises, no lies, just aching truth in every movement. When morning crept in, she rose without waking him, dressed in silence, touched his cheek once, and left, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of lavender on a pillow and a memory he wouldn't name. In her purse was the check enough to free her brother, to breathe again, but in her heart, something else stirred, something unexpected. Weeks later, she'd sit in a doctor's office, staring at two pink lines, and realize the night that saved her brother had also rewritten her destiny. Savannah never told Jaxon, never reached out. He disappeared from headlines soon after, and she convinced herself it was better this way. "I'll forget you tomorrow," she had whispered into the wind as she stepped into the cab. But some nights aren't meant to be forgotten. Some become the shadows that walk beside you, even when you build entire lives trying to outrun them. Savannah never looked back the morning she left that hotel room. But the truth is, she never truly moved forward either. She packed her life into 2 suitcases and a swollen heart and disappeared from the city, like a ghost trying to outrun its own name. She relocated to a sleepy town 2 states away, where the noise of ambition was replaced by the hush of early morning dew and lonely bus rides. 9 months after that unforgettable night, in a dimly lit hospital with no hand to hold and no familiar face beside her, she gave birth to a boy with eyes like lightning trapped in a summer sky. The first time she saw Caleb's face, her chest collapsed under the weight of recognition. His father's piercing blue gaze stared up at her, innocent and unaware. He even had Jackson's dimple carved into his left cheek like a cruel reminder she could never erase. She wept silently as she held him for the first time, not from pain or joy, but from a grief so complex it didn't have a name. She had imagined telling Jaxon when she first found out, drafting messages and dialing his number, only to hang up before the call connected. But within weeks of her sonogram, the media exploded with news. Jaxon Wilder was newly engaged to Delilah Prescott, the polished daughter of a powerful senator. Headlines painted them as the golden couple, woe dynasties merging, empires aligning, and the fairy tale beginning. Savannah watched from a worn couch with her hand on her stomach, and tears she couldn't explain blurring the screen. That was when she made her choice. She deleted every draft, blocked every number, and sealed her truth like a secret meant to rot quietly inside her. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that her child deserved peace, not the chaos of a man who chose power over presence. She never told Caleb who his father was. She simply said he was gone, and let the mystery become part of their quiet rhythm. Savannah found a job teaching literature at a small public school, scraping by on passion and long nights grading papers, hiding her brilliance behind modest cardigans and tied-back hair. She rented a tiny house with creaky floors and a garden that Caleb filled with toy dinosaurs and wildflowers he picked for her after school. Life was not easy, but it was real. It was hers. Caleb grew fast, quicker than she was ready for. He was curious, gentle, with a mind too sharp for his age, and questions that landed like darts in her chest. He loved constellations, puzzles, and bedtime stories, and whenever he smiled, Savannah had to remind herself to breathe. But as he got older, the questions started changing. "Why don't I look like you, Mom?" he asked once, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, his soft voice echoing like thunder. She swallowed her history, kissed his forehead, and answered with a trembling smile, "Because you look like someone unforgettable." At night, when the world was silent and Caleb's breathing filled their little home, she would sit by his bed and whisper silent apologies into the dark, wishing she had done things differently, wishing fate had been kinder. She never spoke Jackson's name again, not even to herself, but she carried the memory of his touch like a burn that never fully healed. Sometimes she saw his face in a stranger on the street, or heard his voice in a passing commercial, and her heart would falter, just for a second. She told herself it didn't matter, that Jaxon had his life, and she had hers, and that was how it was meant to be. But deep down, beneath the layers of sacrifice and maternal strength, lived a truth she couldn't silence. Caleb wasn't just a reminder of the past. He was a promise of a future she never dared to claim. And though she built a world of quiet love around them, there was a door deep inside her heart. She never opened a door with his name on it. Every birthday Caleb had, every milestone he reached, she'd find herself wondering if Jaxon ever felt a phantom tug in his soul, if he ever dreamt of a boy he didn't know he'd created. And when the silence screamed too loud, Savannah would pour herself a cup of tea, stare at the stars, and remind herself, some truths are safer buried. But fate, as always, had a habit of digging up what the heart tried hardest to hide. The same night Savannah stood at her kitchen window, whispering silent apologies to the stars, hundreds of miles away, Jaxon Wilder sat alone in a glass mansion that felt colder than any storm outside. He had built empires with his code, reshaped industries with ideas born from insomnia, and was now hailed as one of the most powerful men in the world, but power never made him feel less hollow. At 37, Jackson's name was on the lips of investors and dreamers alike, but behind the curtain of success stood a man still haunted by a single unfinished sentence, the one she never got to say before she disappeared. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she went, but he remembered her eyes, deep, moonlit, wild with something more than survival. She had slipped out of his life like a dream the morning he finally slept without nightmares, and he had never forgiven himself for letting her vanish without chasing her. After the engagement with Delilah collapsed in a mess of politics and shallow love, Jaxon tried to bury himself in work. He dated models, hosted charity galas, acquired startups, traveled to islands that most people couldn't pronounce, but no matter how fast he ran, he always returned to that one night that asked for nothing and gave him everything he didn't understand. The world saw brilliance when they looked at him, but he only saw a man who had everything except the one thing that ever made him feel human. One stormy evening, while rummaging through a dusty box of forgotten gala souvenirs for a museum auction, Jaxon stumbled upon an old photograph. It was taken by a press photographer the night of the Wexley Gala, a shot of him shaking hands with a senator, but there she was, in the background, blurry, laughing in the distance in a silver gown that caught the chandelier light like water. His breath caught in his throat. Time stopped. He traced her shape with his fingers like it was sacred, like it might vanish if he blinked. That smile, that spark, It wasn't just a memory, it was a wound reopening. Jaxon dropped everything. His meetings, his calls, even a boardroom pitch he'd waited months for. Something inside him, something long dead, stirred back to life. He made a few discreet calls and hired Pierce Langston, a private investigator known for finding ghosts. All he wanted was her name. No press. No disruption. Just the truth. A decade too late, maybe, but he had to know. That one night had stayed with him not because of the intimacy, but because for the first time in his fame-wrapped life, someone had looked at him and not seen money, power, or myth. They saw a man, broken and lonely, and loved him in spite of it. And now, with a photo in one hand and an ache in his chest, he needed to find her, not to rewrite the past, but to confront what he abandoned when he let her walk out without asking why. He thought about how many times he'd passed by strangers, wondering if one of them might be her. How many nights he'd laid beside women who whispered love, and all he felt was silence. And in that silence, her name unknown, but still sacred, was always there. He remembered how she told stories with her eyes, how she laughed with a touch of sorrow, and how she disappeared without asking for anything. Now, standing in his penthouse, drenched in memory and rain against glass, he wondered what her life had become. Did she ever think of him? Was she happy? Did she remember that night? He had answers to none of it, and it killed him slowly. When Pierce returned days later with a file sealed in Manila, Jaxon hesitated before opening it. Something inside him knew this wasn't just about closure. It was about the fracture in his soul that had never healed. As he slowly opened the file and scanned the contents, his pulse began to race. Her name, her address, a recent photo. She looked different, stronger, wiser, softer in the eyes, but still burning like wildfire beneath. His heart clenched. She was real. Not a ghost, not a fantasy, and she wasn't alone. In the corner of one photo stood a young boy, brown-haired, wide-eyed, and unmistakably familiar. The same dimple, the same jawline, the same storm-colored eyes. Jackson's world stopped spinning. That wasn't just a photograph. That was revelation. That was consequence. That was the beginning of a truth he never knew he had been part of. He dropped the file onto the floor, stunned, breathless, his hands shaking in the silence of his billion-dollar loneliness. He stared out the window as lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating a future he never saw coming. Somewhere out there was a child with his blood and a woman who had carried the weight of both their mistakes alone for a decade. And for the first time in years, Jaxon didn't feel powerful. He felt lost, terrified, and more alive than he had in a very long time. The world hadn't stopped spinning when Jaxon saw the photo, but now, stepping into the glass-walled innovation hub of his company, surrounded by students and staff and the distant hum of machinists, it did, because standing at the center of the group was a boy with his exact smile, his unmistakable chin, his piercing blue eyes, and the kind of presence that made gravity feel optional. Jackson's throat closed, his heart slammed against his ribs like a warning, and every cell in his body recognized the truth before a single word was spoken. The boy turned toward him with easy confidence, his hand raised in greeting, and said the sentence that would sever Jackson's reality from everything he thought he knew. "Hi, I'm Caleb Rayne." The name detonated inside him like a quiet bomb. Rayne. Her name. Her blood. His blood. A decade of unspoken truths hung in the space between those 4 syllables. His team kept talking, showing slides and gadgets and 3D models, but Jaxon heard nothing, saw nothing, except the boy, his son, standing in front of him, unaware of the storm he'd just awakened. Jaxon excused himself from the group, face unreadable, then followed the school's visiting files, tracing the name of the district, the elementary school, the teachers attached to the tour. And when he walked into the teacher's lounge the following day, freshly shaved, tie crisp, pulse like thunder, the universe folded. There she was, Savannah Rayne, standing by the coffee machine, pouring cream into a chipped mug, as if she hadn't broken him and carried his legacy in silence. She turned around slowly, sensing his presence before her eyes met his, and when they did, her whole body flinched. Her knuckles went pale around the mug, her breath caught, and time dragged them both back 10 years in one brutal heartbeat. She looked different, tired but radiant, older but magnetic, like life had shaped her into steel and sunlight. He stepped forward slowly, voice low but furious, cracking under weight he could barely carry. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question wasn't simple. It came wrapped in betrayal, aching with missed birthdays, crawling with guilt. Her lip trembled, but she didn't step back. "Because you didn't come looking," she said, the answer sharp as glass, her voice breaking at the edges but her eyes defiant. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was deafening, the kind of silence that echoes with everything unsaid, everything lost, everything that might have been. Jaxon stared at her, unable to speak, choking on the tidal wave of emotion crashing through him. Rage at her silence, sorrow at his ignorance, grief at the years he could never reclaim. He imagined Caleb's first steps, his first word, his first tooth lost. The scraped knees and bedtime stories and school plays, he'd missed all of it, spiraled around him like ghosts. Savannah's hands shook as she placed the mug down, her facade splintering beneath the weight of his stare. "You left," she said quietly, voice hollow. "And then you got engaged 2 weeks later. I thought it meant nothing to you." His jaw clenched. "I didn't even know you were gone until the tabloids told me I was getting married." She laughed bitterly, no humor in it, just pain. "So you were a prisoner too?" He stepped closer. I was a coward with no clue what I had just lost. Tears built in her eyes but didn't fall. She had cried alone too many nights to let them escape now. "He's smart," she said softly, eyes flickering to the boy in the photo on her desk. "Kind. And he asks questions I can't keep answering with silence anymore." Jackson's eyes followed hers to the image of Caleb holding a science fair trophy, his grin so wide it almost hurt. "Does he know?" he whispered. She shook her head. "Just that his father was someone I once knew. Someone who didn't stay." Jaxon staggered back like the words struck him physically. "I didn't stay because I didn't know I had a reason to," he said, voice cracking. Her shoulders fell, the fight draining slowly out of her. "I didn't want to be your regret," she whispered. "I wanted to be more than a one-night whisper." His face crumpled, the weight of it all crushing him, his absence, his ignorance, her strength, their child. "He's not my regret," he said. "He's my miracle. And so were you." But the space between them was still sharp, still aching, still soaked in history. They stood there, not as strangers, not as lovers, but as two people fractured by time, destiny, and the choices they didn't make. And in that moment, in the silent stillness of that school lounge, the air thick with words they didn't know how to speak, it became clear this wasn't the end of something. It was the violent, tender, terrifying beginning of everything they had both tried to forget. The silence between them didn't end in the teacher's lounge, it followed them into the days that came after. Stretching like a tightrope, neither dared cross too quickly. Jaxon wanted to know his son, not just from a photograph but from laughter, from awkward stories, from the weight of what he'd missed and what he could still become. Savannah hesitated, torn between the walls she'd built and the little boy who now looked at her with eyes full of questions too big for her arms alone. Caleb's curiosity was growing louder. He had started drawing pictures of men with blue eyes beside castles made of circuitry, asking if inventors could be fathers too. So, after weeks of tension wrapped in hesitant texts and glances that hovered on old pain, Savannah agreed to meet not with Caleb, not yet, but just the two of them, to talk like people caught between then and now. Jaxon chose the Wilder family vineyard, once vibrant with laughter, now sleeping beneath years of wind and wildflowers, a place where history whispered from every vine. The sun dipped low as Savannah stepped out of her car, her boots crunching against gravel softened by memory, her breath caught at the sight of him leaning against the old wooden gate, nervous, like a man unlearning confidence. The air between them pulsed with something fragile as they walked past rows of tangled vines and stories they hadn't shared. Jaxon talked first, voice quiet but steady, about the years he'd wasted building things that didn't matter, the people he surrounded himself with, the moments he'd trade every dollar to undo. Savannah told him about first teeth, late-night fevers, science fairs, and the ache of watching her son ask for pieces of a puzzle she could never give him. Regret painted both their voices, but laughter broke through, surprising, real, born from years of pain suddenly made human. They sat on an overturned barrel beneath the stars as the sky began to turn velvet. Savannah shivered when the wind picked up, and without a word, Jaxon draped his coat over her shoulder saw. Simple act that felt like rewriting time. Their hands brushed on the wood between them, and in that fleeting touch, the vineyard, the stars, the decade of silence, all of it fell away. Her breath hitched, his gaze softened. "I hated you for so long," she whispered, voice trembling with more than just cold. "I hated myself longer," he replied, and his voice cracked, raw with truth. And then, finally, without permission or pretense, they kissed not like strangers rediscovering fire, but like soulmates sifting through ash. It was soft, hesitant at first, but deepened with years of longing like time itself, had waited for this one moment to forgive them both. Her hand found his face, his fingers curved around her waist. Everything unsaid poured between them in silence. But just as warmth blossomed between old wounds, something shifted in the shadows. A presence, a stillness too deliberate. Unseen eyes watched from behind the gnarled trees at the vineyard's edge, where moonlight didn't reach. Savannah felt at first a chill, not from wind, but instinct. She pulled back, heart thudding, breath uneven, scanning the dark. Jaxon stilled beside her, following her gaze. The magic of the night cracked, and suddenly, the past they were just beginning to heal wasn't the only thing returning. The moment shattered at the vineyard lingered in Savannah's chest like a whisper trying to become a scream, but there wasn't time to unpack it, because within days, the past returned not as memory but as a storm. It came in heels and headlines, wrapped in designer control, and a voice trained to manipulate nations, Delilah Knox. The woman who once stood beside Jaxon on every red carpet reappeared like a shadow that had never truly left. Her arrival wasn't subtle, was a press leak, a boardroom ambush, and finally, a face-to-face confrontation dripping with entitlement and veiled threats. Jaxon didn't flinch when she walked into his office. He'd faced investors with fangs, but Delilah had always played a different game, the emotional kind, the one laced with poison hidden beneath polished smiles. But nothing prepared him for the words she delivered like a knife wrapped in silk. I paid someone to find her, told them to lie, told them to say you were marrying me because you almost did. The room tilted. The air thickened. Savannah hadn't left because she didn't care. She left because she was manipulated into vanishing. Jaxon stood, jaw tight, fists clenched, breath ragged with disbelief. You did what? He hissed, voice rising like thunder before a storm. Delilah's eyes remained calm. Too calm. She would have ruined everything. One night and you were already turning soft. You stopped listening to strategy, started talking about fate. I couldn't let you throw away your empire for a waitress with stardust in her eyes. Jackson's fury pulsed in his veins. Savannah was never just a girl to him. She was the only thing in his world that had ever felt real. Meanwhile, Savannah stood outside the glass office, frozen, listening, her heart tearing with every sentence. The truth slammed into her like a wave she'd never seen coming. Everything, her silence, her sacrifice, her loneliness, had been built on a lie crafted by a woman desperate for control. When Jaxon found her later that night, her eyes were glassy, unreadable, and her voice was barely a breath. I thought you didn't care. I thought I was disposable. His hands shook as he reached for her. I never walked away from you, Savannah. I was pushed. Her tears spilled, not loud, just steady. But you still let me believe I was nothing, she whispered, and the words cut deeper than any accusation ever could. He crumbled in front of her, raw and exposed. Not the billionaire, not the strategist, just a man broken by a lie he never saw coming. But this time, he didn't retreat into silence. This time, he didn't walk away. Because Delilah's threats came fast if he acknowledged Caleb publicly, she would destroy them. Headlines, scandal, fabricated court battles. But Jaxon didn't blink. Let it burn, he said, cold and clear, standing taller than he ever had. I'll take every microphone, every camera, and tell the truth myself. Savannah stared at him, uncertain if she could believe this man would finally fight. But his eyes, those same storm-colored eyes she once fell for, held no hesitation. Jaxon was done being a puppet, done letting power silence love. And if Delilah thought she still had control, she was about to learn what happened when a man with nothing left to lose decided to reclaim what was stolen from him. As the city lights glimmered beyond the office towers and Savannah stood at the center of a war she never asked for, one truth crystallized through the rubble of betrayal. Love, once broken, could still rise if both hearts were willing to bleed for it. The morning of the press event arrived like thunder wrapped in sunlight. Cameras lined the marble steps outside Wilder Industries. Journalists clutching notepads and microphones, each expecting a dramatic scandal or another cold billionaire press release. But Jaxon had rewritten the script. He stood at the podium in a simple suit. No logos, no lawyers, just truth brimming in his chest, and the image of a 10-year-old boy who had unknowingly saved him. Savannah stood in the back, fingers clenched around a necklace Caleb had made from dried pasta and painter, good luck charm, her anchor. But none of them expected what came next. As Jaxon opened his mouth to speak, a small figure broke from the crowd quick, certain and fearless. Caleb. His steps echoed like a heartbeat across the stage floor as gasps rippled through the sea of reporters. The security guard hesitated, but Jaxon raised a hand to stop him, already stepping forward. Caleb reached up, grabbed his father's hand, and lifted it high not with hesitation, but with certainty forged in the fire of years without answers. Cameras snapped. Phones lit up. The world held its breath. "This is my dad," Caleb said, voice clear and steady, eyes wide but brave. He didn't know, but now he does, and I'm proud to be a son. The words shattered the room. The silence cracked, replaced with cheers, claps, even tears from faces once poised to destroy them. In the back, Savannah covered her mouth, heart pounding, tears slipping free not out of pain this time, but pride, love, awe. Jaxon bent down, embraced Caleb tightly, his jaw trembling, his soul unburdening with every second he held his son. On the far edge of the stage, Delilah stood frozen, lips curled, her last thread of control snapping under the weight of a child's truth. She turned sharply, storming off before a single reporter could reach her, her silence louder than any headline. In the days that followed, the world kept talking, but Jaxon didn't care. He stepped down as CEO, not in disgrace but in choice. He walked away from power to finally learn what mattered most. He bought a small lake house outside the city where Caleb could build rockets and paint sunsets. Savannah began to write not emails or lesson plans, but her truth, her story, her scars and strength. The memoir she titled One Night, Forever Changed became more than a book, it became a beacon. Women read it and cried. Men read it and listened. Families read it together. Jaxon helped with Caleb's school projects, learned how to braid friendship bracelets, and burned dinner more times than he could count, but he never missed another moment. They didn't chase perfection. They chased presence. And in quiet moments, when the world was still, Savannah would look at Jaxon not as the man who once left, but the one who returned when it mattered most. They didn't fall back into what they once were. They rose into something stronger, built on truth, healing, and new beginnings. On a soft golden evening, Savannah sat by the lake, microphone in hand, recording the final lines of her audiobook. Her voice, now calm, full of strength, wrapped around the last words like a lullaby. "Some nights break you," she whispered, staring at the reflection of her son playing with Jaxon in the water. "But some rewrite your story." And as the sun dipped low and the world turned quietly forward, their story full of heartbreak, redemption, and love born from ruin finally found its forever chapter.